Global's newsroom at 8 o'clock. Donald Trump's announced a 90-day pause on higher tariffs for all countries except China. Instead, the US president is raising the rate on Chinese imports to 125% with immediate effect after Beijing retaliated against Washington's hikes. Dennis Wilder, a former director of China at the White House Security Council, told LBC News the US is in a full-blown trade war.
Donald Trump is throwing hand grenades at the Chinese. The Chinese leadership today met in emergency session. They see a crisis. They see a nightmare that they have not really wanted to see happen. They worried about it, but they hoped to avoid it.
A woman who buried her husband in their garden in Canterbury in Kent has been jailed for at least 22 years for his murder. A court heard Maureen Rickard subjected Jeremy to unimaginable pain. 7 police officers have been taken to hospital following a crash on the A1 on Tyneside. A man and a woman, both in their 20s, are in custody. And the King has tried his hand at speaking Italian as he addressed both houses of the Parliament in Rome. Charles and Camilla will attend a state banquet later. The Vatican says Pope Francis has met privately with the King and Queen today. In the city, the FTSE 100 closed down 231 points at 76.79. The pound buys $1.27 and €1.15. LBC weather dry for much of the UK tonight, a low of -2. From Global's newsroom for LBC, I'm Daryl Jackson.
This is LBC from Global, leading Britain's conversation. Cross Question with Iain Dale.
Hello, a very good evening. It's 2 minutes past 8 on LBC. Welcome to Wednesday's Cross Question. Joining me on the panel, sitting to my left, Jessica Harrington, family law barrister who's a former Conservative MP. You will remember her as Jessica Lee in those days, but she's got married since. Next to her is Aman, Bhogal, founder of the Global Britain Centre think tank. He'll tell us what that's all about in just a moment. To my right, we have Bobby Dean, Liberal Democrat MP for Carshalton and Wallington. And next to him, Iain Birrell, the investigative journalist and foreign correspondent. So they're here to answer your questions on Trump, tariffs, anything you like. 0345 6060 973 is the number to call, and we'd love you to watch us on Global Player.
Call 0345 6060 973. Tweet at LBC. Text 84850. Cross Question with Iain Dale. This is LBC.
Well, let's go to our first call. It's from David in Mayfair. David, whenever I read out somebody in Mayfair, I always assume they're going to be very posh.
No, far from it, Ian. I'm a cockney.
Excellent.
Good evening, panel. My question is: has Donald Trump's U-turn cost him his bullying leverage? What I mean is, if the Vietnamese have been mentioned, trying to, do a deal today, would they be thinking, hang on, this guy's on the ropes at the moment, so we're going to do a bit more, we've got some more leverage than you thought?
So, in a sense, you're asking, does it make him look weak to the countries he was, in your words, trying to bully? Iain Birrell.
Yeah, it makes him look very weak. He said he wasn't going to capitulate. His press secretary today said he wasn't going to capitulate, and a few minutes later he capitulated. He announced the 90-day pause. What he's proved is Margaret Thatcher's dictum that you can't buck the market.
I said this 15 minutes ago in the last hour. I'm so glad you've endorsed what I said.
And, at one stage today, investors saw Greece. The yield on Greek bonds was lower than the yield on America bonds. That means that investors saw Greece as a safer haven than the haven which has been the safest haven for years. Trump has upended the economic order and the system which America has pushed and backed so successfully for decades. And we're seeing the consequences. You cannot do this and try to maintain this sort of system and try to maintain equanimity when you're throwing everything out in the window like this. They haven't thought it through, and it was very clear that they hadn't thought it through, and the blowback has been intense, and it's been catastrophic, and it's a ludicrous approach that he's taking, and it's come back to bite him. And as the Singaporean Prime Minister said, this is America upending the system which America has been pushing for decades, a system of globalization and free trade, which has been so successful for the world despite its faults. Let's not forget that in the 30 years up to the pandemic, 1.3 billion people came out of poverty. life expectancy increased by a decade over that period, over just 30 years. Global poverty per capita global wealth doubled per capita over those 30 years. Globalization has been very successful. America has been the biggest beneficiary, and now it's ripping it all up, and it's destroying all its alliances around the world.
And of course, China is the one country that isn't going to get 10% tariffs. He's put them up to, having announced 104%, a few hours later it became 125%. Now, that could have catastrophic consequences, not just in America and China, but also there could be a ripple effect for other economies.
Of course. I mean, there's a trade war between the two biggest economies in the world, which is disastrous for everyone. It's very interesting. If you look in America, there's lots of small businesses which are saying, but hang on, we've been advised by all the experts to source our production lines in places like China and Vietnam, and now they're threatened with going out of business. This will have ripple effects around the world. And, it's also great for China, which is, I think, a really corrosive force within the world. And it's really good for China in that it's making them look like the beacon of stability compared to America. And that's catastrophic for democracy when we're engaged in essentially a war between autocracy and democracy around the world. And China is the key behind-the-scenes player in all this. And Donald Trump is playing into their hands just like he's playing into Vladimir Putin's hands over Ukraine.
And I was saying earlier that I think actually people who don't obsess about global economics, just ordinary punters listening to this programme now, a lot of people are going to think, well, I actually feel rather sorry for China. So they're feeling sorry for a brutal communist state as opposed to the so-called freedom, the beacon of democracy that is supposed to be the United States.
And of course, a state which is engaged in, massive industrial espionage and cyber terrorism and things like this behind the scenes. And, Trump is playing into their hands, and that, I think, is a disaster. I was in Hong Kong for the protests. I've seen what happens to people who dare stand up to China. And, this is just disastrous. And that's really what's so criminal about what Donald Trump is doing, is that he's not only, this entitled billionaire is not only wrecking the lives for many people in his own country, for many people around the world, but he is also undermining democracy globally.
Bobby Dean.
Well, I think Trump invented a new word the other day, panican, and it turns out it's a self-descriptor, right? I mean, he's literally backpedaled on everything that he said he wouldn't do. I think Iain's hit the nail on the head when he talks about the bond markets. I mean, this is now costing the US government more money to run their own state because of his actions. And so it's comparable to Liz Truss, really. It's kind of a moment where he wants to have this big bang, and actually he's having to cycle backwards pretty quickly. It's obvious the damage it's done to the stock markets. It's obvious the damage it's done to the stability of the global economy. But I think it's also becoming increasingly obvious that those people that have decided to retaliate and stand together and told they would be punished for doing so haven't been. So he's lost all leverage in this negotiation with the rest of the world now, I think. I mean, he actually said in his statement today that those kind countries that didn't retaliate are being reduced back down to 10%. But it includes a whole list of countries that did indeed retaliate. So I think he's lost all leverage in the negotiation.
Well, including the EU, because I think they announced earlier today that they were going
Canada,
to retaliate.
including Mexico.
And so I immediately thought, well, they've announced that 24 hours too early, but apparently they are still going to go down to 10% on the basis that the tariffs haven't come in yet.
Yep, the EU, Canada, Mexico, the penguins, they're all on the same rate now, apart from China. So, Trump's really lost all of his bottle, really, I think, on this. And I think now's the opportunity for Britain and the rest of its allies to get together and really try to get Trump to see sense and save this economic order that has suited most of the world for a long, long time, and to make sure that we keep that kind of international order intact.
But just a second, Jessica, what wasn't your leader urging Keir Starmer to take retaliatory action against Trump right from the start?
Well, he was saying that we should do it in an orderly way alongside our allies. So he was talking about working with Europe and working with our sort of Commonwealth allies in order to do it. And I think that has actually proven to be effective. The fact that people have stood up to Trump, and look, it's in Trump's interest if he gets to pick off each individual country and negotiate a trade deal with them one by one. We stand much stronger together. And so I think it's right that we do take that tact, and we should do that.
Okay. Jessica.
I was just going to come in. Bobby, you make the point about everybody trying to come together and make Trump see sense. To me, If only is my answer to that. To me, I think we're debating whether he looks weak with today's or the latest action today. I think you could get every person on the planet to tell him to his face that he's looking weak and he still wouldn't believe it. He'll still say we were all wrong. Seeing sense, suggests a rational, logical approach, and we've seen it from the outset that is just never going to happen. And it's the unpredictability of this entire situation and him at the centre of it that causes, I think, the greatest alarm. Well, yes, we may all agree, we may not, whether he looks weak or not. But to me, it's just the unpredictable, unguided missile that we've got making these decisions hour by hour at the moment. And as with China, this sort of game of chicken, which he's now entered into, raising numbers by the hour, changing what he's saying, it's terrifying. Ian's summarised for us, the consequences of entering into that sort of situation. I agree with what Iain said. And in terms of leverage, I wish I was confident that the situation gave other countries leverage at the moment. I would hope so. Fortunately, I don't see it when he's just acting in such an unpredictable way.
Just to come back quickly on that point, I think you're absolutely right that us small L liberals, I'm not making you all Liberal Democrats now, but small L liberals always try to see the rationality in the argument, and he is an irrational actor, broadly speaking, and so we can't rely on this being any sort of strategic act. But reality bites, and reality has bitten him today. And I think the real economic consequences that we've seen of his irrational actions.
That's my worry.
He has had to pull back, though, hasn't he? And he has today because he's been forced into that.
Up to a point, because he still imposed 10% tariffs on people like us that didn't have them before. We had we I think imposed generally 2.5% tariffs on America. So he still made people worse off by doing this.
He has indeed, and that we should not turn our noses up at the impact that 10%.
And it's only a pause, isn't it, for 90 days? So again, what business craves more than anything stability, so they can make plans for the future and plan their business. And this is more instability.
But also, that 90 days means that we have 90 days to get a free trade deal. Now, my understanding is that free trade deals take a lot longer than that to negotiate. But I think the Starmer government had imposed some sort of deadline of the 1st of May. Well, they don't need to adhere to that deadline anymore, so it might possibly be.
But do we really think America's going to do deals with all these countries?
No,
Donald Trump says
who cares about the other countries? I'm talking about the United Kingdom, which is.
But we're one of only many who are wanting to do deals with America. And in America, experts are saying there's no way that all these deals are going to be done in 90 days. Well,
Aman. Let's be honest. I think the bottom line here is this is exactly what the doctor ordered for America. President Trump campaigned on this day in, day out throughout the election campaign, and that's exactly what he's doing. Now, that's not to say he was campaigning for this 40 years ago. Over the last 40 years, this is exactly what he's campaigning for. Look, we're all fans of free trade. What we haven't had with the Chinese is free trade. America's got a $300 billion deficit. We have a £55 billion deficit in goods with the Chinese. This is not free trade. This is lopsided trade that is reducing the jobs in the West that are worth doing. We've exported all our jobs worth doing to China, to Vietnam. We're importing millions of people to do low-paid, low-skilled jobs instead. This is exactly what the American people voted for. Tonight, we've seen the NASDAQ is up 9.6%. The Dow Jones is 7% up. The US dollar is up against the yen, 0.3%. It is working. This is exactly where President Trump wanted the Chinese. As Caroline Leavitt, the press secretary, said earlier, I think a lot of people need to go and read The Art of the Deal. That's what it boils down to. This is about making...
You said everyone's in favour of free trade, and yet you've been kind of arguing against it. So this is what you said. This is working.
Well, exactly. We need to level the playing field. How is it free trade if the Chinese are able to freely export with a deficit to the US of $300 billion?
Isn't that free trade where businesses are choosing? I know you said that Liz Truss and Donald Trump would make us more prosperous, but, we're not really seeing that, are we? This is businesses making a choice as to how to have cheap products, and they're choosing to do this because you listen to how much the cost, say, of your Nike trainers would be.
Okay.
And also, people chose to leave manufacturing. People chose to leave those jobs because they want to work in offices. They want to work in nicer places rather than in sweatshops.
Ask the average man and woman in Scunthorpe, in Sheffield, in the Midwest of the US, are they better off today than they were 30 years ago? And the answer you will hear on the doorstep is no, they're not. What does that tell us? There are no jobs in those areas. What have we seen already happening? We've had Hyundai Steel announce a $6 billion steel mill coming into Wisconsin. That would have been unheard of. We've had Apple bringing back manufacturing of the AI chips from Taiwan to the US in a mega $500 billion deal. Well, why is it so wrong that finally we have a person in the White House who's standing up to the Chinese communists, who rip off IP, who steal ideas and sell it back to us for dirt cheap prices that are subsidized by our own dollars and pounds? It doesn't make sense. If anyone needs to stand up to anyone, it's to stand up to the Chinese communists.
But is this the way to do it? That's the point.
Well,
that I think it's
we might disagree on
the approach that's been taken and the fast pace and, erratic decisions, the numbers just coming out of the White House.
Biden was standing up as well, and actually people were better off. Were people better off 30 years ago? Yes. No, they weren't better off.
And
people were much better off today. Why has life expectancy increased? Why has per capita income increased so much? Look at the lives of people who were living 30 years ago. Look today. People have got better. Society has improved, and that's due to globalization and due to free trade. And of course it's not perfect. There has been political failure in that politicians have allowed some areas to get left behind where industry, because doesn't make sense for businesses to be rooted there to make some of these products. Businesses have moved. That's what businesses should do in a free trade system. And politicians have let us down and failed to help those societies and those areas.
That we haven't had free trade per se. We've had very unfair trade. It's not free trade. It's unfair trade.
How's it been unfair?
I think.
Well, because as you said,
I think businesses have a right to make a choice as to where they want to be.
But
you have a right as to whether you buy their goods or not.
But you're also saying that politicians have failed us. I mean, for example, now.
Not on trade. Politicians failed. If a community has lost, if the mines disappear, then I think the point of government is to help those societies, those communities, which are seeing difficult times and seeing major change, to help them and find new ways of employment, getting new businesses in, to help them with education, training, whatever it is, to take them. Because
how would you do that if you're outsourcing everything to the Chinese?
You're not outsourcing everything to the Chinese.
But you can address
You're
that
not
problem
outsourcing
in a different
everything.
way.
Britain has really successful, high-quality manufacturing still. We're one of the world's leading players in services. A lot of people actually don't want to work in mines. They don't want to work in sweatshops. They prefer to live in a more pleasant environment, more productive. People have choices to make.
Well, that's not what people in Sheffield and Scunthorpe would say. They would say, we want to have our local steel mill to be kept open. We want to produce high quality steel and not import Chinese junk.
But we've seen where this ends up in history, right? We've seen where this ends up in history, because when you have this tit for tat scenario, everybody ends up losing out. I mean, look, globalization has had its failures. Inequality is one of them. Within the UK and across the world, for sure, those need addressing. But this idea that you can just close the walls down
so how else would you say we stand up to the Chinese communists who have amassed $3 trillion in their foreign exchange over the last 21 years? How would you say we stand up to them?
I'd like us to take a much tougher stance with China on political and social and economic issues.
How would you do it?
Well, we may need to look at certain trade unions, amongst others, that are not with China. For instance, Trump is slapping tariffs on everybody in the region of China as well, right? All in the Southeast
And why do you think
Asian
he's
region.
doing that?
But he should be actually building allies with those countries.
Yeah, because he's driving these countries into the arms of China.
Exactly.
On the contrary, 75 countries are lining up to do a trade deal.
If you want to stand up to China, then you need to have strong allies to do so.
Yes.
And if you are becoming an unreliable ally...
I think a lot of people need to get out in the real world. Look, I'm a foundry man by profession myself. I learnt the ropes on a furnace. Out there, certainly in Asia, the only thing that talks is money, because that's what has lifted out people out of sheer poverty into prosperity. They don't care whether they're standing with the Chinese, whether they're standing with the US. The only thing that matters to them is what's going to put a pay packet in their pocket for their family.
And he's making them poorer now. By doing this, and therefore driving them into the hands of China.
And it's globalisation which has lifted them out of poverty. It's globalisation which lifted them out of poverty. Why do so many Chinese people come out of poverty?
Let's do it after the break, because we're already rather late. And also, let me warn you, Donald Trump has been speaking. We'll bring you some of his remarks in just a few moments' time. It's 19 minutes past 8.
This is LBC. Cross Question with Iain Dale on LBC.
21 minutes past 8. Now, Donald Trump has just been speaking outside the White House, and he's just said this.
I'm honored to have done it. And, look, nothing's over yet, but we have a tremendous amount of spirit from other countries, including China. China wants to make a deal. They just don't know how quite to go about it. It's one of those things they don't know how quite. They're proud people. And President Xi's a proud man. I know him very well. And they don't know quite how to go about it, but they'll figure it out. They're in the process of figuring it out, but they want to make a deal.
Well, how enlightening was that? He's also claimed things are working out for America, maybe faster than I thought. He thought, not me. I mean, it is quite bizarre, isn't it? That bit's just appeared. No, it says working out for America, maybe faster than I thought. I thought there was more to come there, but there we go. Right, on our panel, Bobby Dean, Liberal Democrat MP for Carshalton and Wallington, Aman Bhogal, who you just heard from, founder of the Global Britain Centre think tank. 30-second elevator pitch, what is it?
Well, this is exactly what America voted for. This is exactly what he's delivering on.
No, your think tank. What is it?
Free trade, free enterprise, free democracy. That's what we're fighting for, to make the best of Brexit and the benefits that it brings.
Free trade with tariffs, though?
No, free trade that is fair.
OK. Jessica Harrington is here, former Conservative MP and family law barrister, and Iain Birrell, investigative journalist and foreign correspondent. Right, on this theme, Sam in Enfield is on the line. Sam, what would you like to ask?
Good evening, Iain, and good evening to your panel. I just wanted to say that when tariffs are imposed, President Trump always says, I'm imposing tariffs on Mexico or Canada or China. But I think people in the US have realized that the consumer is the one who pays the tariff. That $2 billion that he's raising every day, he's raising it from the American public. And I think there's a pushback. And I think all of these very wealthy people, the tech bros, they are pushing back now, saying, what the hell are you doing? I think people's pension funds are collapsing because they're the biggest investors in the stock market. The Chinese are the biggest holders of US bonds, and they're going to start selling them. I think he's got his back up against a wall, and I think he's bottled it. And I'd like the panel really just to come back on that. And one other quick point regarding tariffs. If you're going to have a policy where you want your companies to come back to the USA, what you do is you give them some time. You say, I'm going to impose tariffs in a year's time on these countries. You've got 1 year to get your operations back to the USA. You don't apply tariffs and say you've got until tomorrow. So I'd like a little bit of opinion from the panel on that.
OK, Aman, let's start with you.
OK, so if tariffs are so bad in terms of controlling the geoeconomics and geopolitics, then why is the EU the master of all tariffs? If tariffs are so bad, then what?
Hang on a minute, you run a think tank that you've just said the first priority for it was free trade.
Free trade means fair trade. It doesn't mean that we fill up the coffers.
Banging on about how wonderful tariffs are. I don't get it.
No, I'm rebutting the idea that somehow tariffs are not a tool that are used by multiple countries to drive their geopolitics and their national interests. This is what the US is doing. Okay, let me give you an example. About 5 years ago, literally every single mobile phone being sold in India was being imported, made in China, Vietnam, or Taiwan. And that was something that was driving up prices, sending a lot of foreign exchange from India over to these countries. What did Prime Minister Modi do? He said, I'm going to put 100% tariff on every single mobile phone being imported. And what did that end up doing? Samsung built the world's biggest mobile phone factory in Noida, manufacturing 250 million mobile phones every single year. America is the world's biggest market. There is no country that worth its salt that wants to manufacture and export something to that place that is going to simply shy away from not doing a deal with the US. And when it comes to doing a free trade agreement, yes, a full free trade agreement can take years to negotiate, but enhanced trading partnership can be done in 6 months. The Australians showed that with us. The Japanese showed that with us. The UAE and India showed it together. The Australians and the Indians did it together in 6 months. So this is something that is very doable.
Okay, Jessica.
Yeah, I think with Sam's question that comes in, is he going to see sense? Is he going to back down? the point for me is, I said earlier the word unpredictable. The other point that I worry about is just the impatience that you see with Trump. He wants whatever he wants now, and even that's not quick enough. So all of these elements together with the person in the White House, along with everything else that we've all read and heard about him, creates, to me, we were discussing free trade, and I understand about your think tank, Aman, and everything that you're doing. You've obviously have a great experience and interest in it. But we don't live in a world that doesn't work if you're just dealing with some tyrant in the White House acting in this irrational, impatient way to achieve
on the
benefits for international trade that where we all need to get to. And the point being, everybody wants to do a deal with the US. Well, yes, but not on any terms, not in a crazy situation where whatever is even agreed at heads of agreement 1 minute is just unlikely to even appear in any document in the next hour. So it's the combination of those factors. And I would say, as a former Conservative, MP, I know the history of the Conservative Party when it's come to big moments in the world when free trade has been an issue. Look at the Corn Laws, we look at the 1906 general election and so on. Conservatives, haven't fared well, despite the fact, of course, that it's been a bedrock of much of what it's said.
Let's add in a follow-up WhatsApp question from Greg in Tunbridge Wells. Has Trump actually achieved what he wanted to do by getting people around the negotiating table? It's obviously been done in a belligerent way, but is there merit in a fair bit of what he's done for the USA, Bobby?
No, I think he's actually mobilised what used to be his allies in a way that, was unthinkable just a few years ago. They're now thinking about how they can build up their own strength in ways that can match America's. So, look, he may think that he has, but I think he's weakened his position immediately today. And just to go back to one of Aman's points, look, I think we can accept that free trade is not the complete absence of tariffs, but it's certainly not the indiscriminate proliferation of them across the world, which is what Trump is trying to do now. That is going to be damaging for consumers and for American residents as much as it is for everybody else.
But it's what they voted for. It's what they voted. They knew exactly what was on offer. The American people are impatient because it's been in decline.
I would go back to listen to what people actually were saying.
Oh, really? So it's a bit like what people are saying about Brexit as a Lib Dem. They didn't know what they were voting for. Come on.
No, I'm not saying they didn't know what they voted for. I'm saying that people wanted the cost of living to be reduced, and they heard that there was a solution out there, and now watching it spectacularly fail. That's what's happening.
No, he told them exactly how he was going to do it, and that's exactly what he's doing.
Just remember, Aman, 25% of Liberal Democrat voters voted for Brexit.
Well, there you go. Come on.
Many in my constituency, in fact.
I think today we've also seen in Germany the formation of a new coalition.
Have we?
And it's very interesting that the new Conservative Chancellor-to-be of Germany is someone who's quite tough. He's quite on the right of the party. He's been quite forceful on immigration. And he's come in and he's said very clearly that basically the world has changed. We can't trust America anymore. And unfortunately, I think he's right. And what Donald Trump has done is create a situation whereby America's natural allies, which are democratic countries across Europe, across the West, in parts of Asia, in parts of Africa. You go to somewhere like Kenya, where the president there has really put himself out to be an ally and a close supporter of America, and they got shafted by the tariffs, and they were incandescent with fury at what happened. And this has been happening around the world, and where I worry, actually, we do have to live in a world where we have to now accept that America can no longer be trusted. It is not stable. It's sliding away to some extent from democracy. It can't be trusted on. You might laugh. I've actually spent a lot of time there.
As have I. Yeah. I think. Look.
And if I could finish.
Yeah, sure.
And it can't be trusted on diplomacy and things like that. And we have to live and accept this world. The world has changed. America can no longer be trusted, and we have to act on that basis. And I think what really worries me is that you do have a society in America which is very divided. And a lot of people there love Donald Trump. And I was just talking to people in Virginia, and about half the people I spoke to absolutely love Donald Trump and really like what he's doing. And the other half are terrified, and they think they're sliding away from the sort of society and democratic freedoms that they've had in the past. There's a real division. And what I worry about is if Trump's popularity slides because of economic tumult, and really he won the election because of the cost of living. That's really why he won the election, as I heard again and again. If he starts to lose popularity, he shown that he's nasty, vindictive. He's surrounded by people who don't say boo to a goose and absolutely back him. And I'm really worried as to what's going to happen in the future as we go down. We've already seen what happened on January the 6th with the insurgency. And going forward, you have this really nasty person who's prepared to thwart the Constitution, prepared to use his executive powers in a way no president has ever done before. And I'm quite scared as to what's going to happen going forward when you've got such a divided society and you've got basically a very mean-minded, egotistical narcissist in the White House surrounded by people who just cheer him on and don't say no to him.
And Iain, just following on from that, if you just think about, you gave us the example of the new German leader today saying what he did. It's inconceivable that even just a year ago, that on coming into office or assuming office, any international leader of a G7, G8, anything like that, normally the first thing is, I'm waiting for my call with the President of the United States, one of the first courtesy, calls that they get, and they make a song and dance about it. Instead, look at the change around. That is inconceivable that a leader of a big international economy like Germany would say on their first day, the leader of the free world can't be trusted.
Well, so let's break this down. Who did Donald Trump call, in his first 5 calls, or even the first 5 visits?
President of Argentina, wasn't it?
No, he called the Prime Minister of Japan. He called the Prime Minister of India. He called the President of Indonesia. The countries that
Israel.
and Israel, the countries that he thinks and his administration thinks that matter in the Indo-Pacific. And that's what we should be looking at as well. But going back a little bit, I mean, look, a lot of people seem to think that President Trump, as the American president, is supposed to be their president. He's not. He's finally there as a nationalist president of the US who's putting the national interest of the US first.
But you can't just shrug decades of history aside. America has always been our number one ally.
And they still are.
And I've always been really pro-American. I used to go to America 2 or 3 times a year. It's got to the point where it's not the country that I knew. And that's because of Donald Trump.
On the contrary, I think the Americans are still our most trusted and most closest ally and partner. That's without a doubt.
No, it isn't.
It is.
It isn't.
Who controls
the problem.
Why is the Vice President attacking Britain the whole time? Why is he supporting the far right?
He's attacking the situation that Britain has been put into by successive governments.
No, he's not. He's attacked Britain.
No,
he's supported the far right in Germany. Do you think that's right that he does that?
Do you think the AfD are the far right?
Yeah, I do.
No, they're not.
Well, so the
AfD.
What are they then?
So the
AfD are what happens when Conservatives don't deliver.
So are German intelligence wrong to say that they see them as so dangerous?
Do you think that all people that were called far right by Keir Starmer are far right because those are the types of people?
Why are you twisting that? I said the AfD. I didn't say anything about Keir Starmer.
No, because that's the comparison that gets drawn.
No, it isn't.
If you really think that the AfD aren't far right,
well, they're topping the polls in Germany.
Well, that doesn't mean to say that they're not far right.
Yeah.
I mean, if you talk to a lot of their people,
far right is someone like, from a UK perspective, far right is someone like the Homeland Party who wants to deport me. Okay, that's far right.
I think the AfD would probably quite like to deport people like
you.
Really? Do you think the leader of the AfD, who's married to a Sri Lankan, do you think she wants to deport her own partner?
Well, they have been caught in private conversations. They have been caught in private conversations talking about forcible deportation. They have had German intelligence warning that they're dangerous. They have been linked to terror attacks. Okay. They have got someone who's been doing Holocaust denialism.
Okay.
So maybe you don't call that far right. I do call that far right.
I shouldn't have let this get onto the AfD, but we are running very late, so let's go to the news headlines at 8:34 with Darryl Jackson.
US President Donald Trump says countries who don't retaliate to tariffs will be rewarded as he freezes all import taxes at 10% for 90 days, except for China. Chinese products going into America will now be slapped with charges of 125% effective immediately. A woman who buried her husband in their garden in Canterbury in Kent's been jailed for at least 22 years for his murder. A court heard Maureen Rickards subjected Jeremy to unimaginable pain. And the Vatican says the King and Queen met with the Pope privately this afternoon during the royal couple's state visit to Italy. We're told Pope Francis wished them a happy 20th wedding anniversary. LBC weather dry for much of the UK tonight, a low of -2.
This is LBC. Cross Question with Iain Dale on LBC. Call 0345 6060 973.
8:37. We've just had a lovely conversation about Germany in the break. Right, let's go to a text question from Joe in Ealing. He says, is the Labour Party held hostage by their reliance on the Muslim vote to the detriment of abused girls? Well, yesterday the government dropped its commitment to provide £5 million of funding for 5 local inquiries into rape gangs, with Home Office Minister Jess Phillips saying that instead this money will be used to adopt a flexible approach to support both full independent local inquiries and more bespoke work, including local victims panels or locally led audits of the handling of historical cases. Bobby, let's start with you on this. So it does seem to be quite an astonishing change of tack by the Labour government. The Conservatives have criticised this move. What's your view?
Well, obviously, child abuse is probably one of the most horrific crimes there can possibly be. And we want to make sure that the government takes the action that they've committed to and go further if they have to as well. Of course, the previous government did have the J inquiry as well, which had 20 recommendations that unfortunately sat on the desk of a minister for 20 months and were not implemented. We need to make sure that those are implemented urgently as well. Just to go back to the question, though, I do have to reject the question about Muslim people perhaps not going to vote for Labour Party if they take action on child grooming gangs. I think that's a quite shocking insinuation to make. So I just want to go on the record and reject that, because I'm pretty sure the Muslim community wants to see action on child grooming gangs too, and I don't want that connection to be made. And as I said, the Conservative government too, sat on a report and had action to do that they did not implement. For me, we just need to keep pushing on this and make sure that the government delivers all of the J inquiry's recommendations and sticks to its word that they said at the dispatch box only recently. But
do you buy this argument as to the reasons that they've given for dropping these inquiries?
Well, we're not entirely sure what the shape of the inquiry is going to be. That's the thing at the moment. They've kind of given some outline guidance about more flexibility in how the inquiries can be held out. I think they need to make sure the inquiries are held in full. And the question of a national inquiry is still out there, right? They said that they was going to take a decision on that, and I think we're all keenly waiting to see whether or not they're going to go ahead with a national inquiry.
Jessica.
I'm really quite appalled by this decision. I think it was cowardly the way it was delivered. 45 minutes or whatever it was just before the end of the parliamentary term. Just it's just like making the announcement, then run for the train home. I'm really disappointed by this, Iain, and I think using phrases like a flexible approach, that to me means nothing will happen. Mm-hmm. I think it is letting down many victims, many families. And I think people were hopeful that there would be something more concrete. But by also Jess Phillips saying, we're following feedback, I mean, what does that mean? What this has done is let down thousands of people. I've been, as a barrister in family law, I've been working the field of child abuse for over 20 years. I've seen some dreadful things over those years, and I've seen many families that need quite a bit of help, to say the least. So when this approach is taken, I'm afraid it's very disappointing. It's what it means is that nothing will now happen. What actually is needed is the opposite. You don't need a flexible approach. You need a robust, strong approach, and you need accountability, and you need change. And by acting in this way, nothing will happen, because there's no commitment. There's no obligation for local inquiries. They can spend the money as they see fit. That'll be the end of it, Iain. This is my worry, and I think it's a real saddening end, effectively, to what I think people were very hopeful would have been achieved.
Aman?
I echo exactly what Jessica says. I think, look, when we have more people in prison for the summer civil unrest from last year in Rotherham than people who engaged in child sexual abuse in that town, that's a real indictment of where the country is on this. But I think I agree with Sir Trevor Phillips, that great voice of sanity, when he says that, look, yes, of course, all right-minded Muslims in the country will, of course, back, as any right-minded person would, action on this. But I think, as Sir Trevor Phillips says, Labour are scared of apparently offending Pakistani voters. And for a very simple reason, we saw what happened in the general election last year. West Streeting came within 500 votes of losing to a pro-Gaza single-ticket candidate. We saw Jonathan Ashworth lose his seat up in Leicestershire East to an Islamist independent, and similarly in a number of other seats. And we've seen so forth in
an entirely different issue.
Let's not say. Can we just not use the word Islamist in this context, because it has other connotations?
But if somebody is standing on a pro-Gaza ticket, unapologetically not condemning Hamas, that is definition of.
But can you make the distinction between standing on a pro-Palestinian ticket and being supportive of child grooming gangs? Because that's the conflation that you're making right now, which I think is deeply offensive.
It's not deeply offensive. A lot of these issues are.
You're saying that Labour voters will not vote for Labour if they take action on child grooming gangs. That's the insinuation you're making. You should be very careful about
that. A lot of these Labour councils were run by people engaged in child sexual abuse. So what hope have we got there of people wanting to vote for people who will take action on the very people that have been engaged in it? Come on. Have you been to Rotherham? Have you been to these places?
I think the concern is that when what we've seen with the from the J inquiry and so on is where something is not just limited to, say, police failings, but it's also to do with officials of all levels, whether it's, it could be to do with social services, local government, whatever it is. When it's all-consuming and all-encompassing, that is when you need action. That's why you need an inflexible approach, not a flexible approach.
But that action could have been taken by the previous government, could it not?
Yeah.
Iain?
I think this is so different to the Gaza situation. It's really offensive to conflate the two together like you have done.
It's not. It really is.
Gaza is a very different issue where Labour was in real problem on an issue of huge sensitivity and got it wrong, badly wrong. Starmer made a mistake and they got the blowback at the election. This is very different. There was an amazing report done which has had hardly any publicity on the fact that a lot of the victims of the gangs were actually Muslim girls who were being, and no one seems to, as Julie Bindel, who started writing about this 15, 20 years ago, pointed out, it seems that the right have only jumped on this when it's Muslim men or Pakistani men and white victim girls. That's not the case at all. She's been campaigning, and she's far more nuanced on it, on the fact that the issue is about child sex abuse, and that's what's being overlooked in all this saga. And, the studies show that there's very limited data on it, and that's one of the great flaws in all this, that we don't have the data to really grapple with it, and that's something that should be sorted out. And I agree with both of you two in what you were saying about these issues, but also we know from the very limited and incomplete data that actually the majority of the group child sex gangs are actually white. And that seems to be being neglected.
That is
it is actually. Look at the study. Look at the data.
Look at the data.
Yeah.
Look at the data per capita. Do you really think that it is white offenders which are going around in gangs grooming young white girls?
Well, there are white grooming gangs.
Of course,
yes, there are.
I'm talking about per capita data here. We have a population in the UK where per capita it is not majority white men going around in grooming gangs.
I'm just looking at what the studies have actually shown in terms of the numbers of people who are doing this.
Yes, let's look at.
We need to be standing up for every
we should be standing up
for
exactly.
Of course we do.
And we shouldn't just focus on one particular group like this.
Are you saying there is not a racial motive, a religious motive that is purported by a lot of these abusers?
I think you have to be careful about those definitions, because I think covering this quite substantially a few years ago, doing lots of phone-ins where you think to yourself, one word out of place here and everyone's in trouble. I think we used the word cultural rather than religious, and I think that is. I don't think there's a religious motive behind so-called Muslim grooming gangs. It's more a sort of cultural thing, and that's what we were told when we were discussing it when it was all.
And I don't disagree with you on that, and I think it is even if you look at the breakdown within the Pakistani community in the UK, large majority of what has happened from a certain subset, as Kemi said, from a lot of people from the Mirpur region of Pakistan. But as Sajid Javid said in Parliament a few years ago, there has been a racial motivation to a lot of these cases of child sexual abuse. I don't disagree with him.
But you just said it was religious. Do you really think that?
No, I think
You said religious.
No, I don't think that. I think a lot of perpetrators, they think that.
But you just said religious. You were blaming religion for this.
No, I was not blaming religion. Do not put words in my mouth.
Well, you were. We can play it back.
I was not blaming religion. I was saying that a lot of the perpetrators are religiously motivated in their own minds. They look at people who are white as kafir, as non-believers. They look at people like me as non-believers. For them, that is religious motivation. I'm not saying that's religiously motivated. On the contrary, I'm married in the UAE. I think a lot of Islam that is here in the West is very different to what we see in the Middle East. Look at the UAE, look at Saudi, look at the great strides that they're making, culturally, religiously, bringing everyone into lockstep with the rest of the world.
But Iain, as we can't even agree, the sort of starting point here about the perpetrators, this is the concern. We need to get back to the victims here, and I just maintain that the initiatives that are now flexible and may or may not go ahead in local communities, to me means zero change. And there was a real chance here to make some change.
Okay. Right, we're going to move on in just a moment and introduce yet another controversial question on taxing the wealthy. It's 8:48.
This is LBC. Cross Question with Iain Dale on LBC. Text 84850.
8:51. Bobby Dean, Aman, Bhogal, Jessica Harrington and Ian Birrell answering your questions. Tyler's in Leeds. Hello, Tyler.
Hey, Mr. Dale, good evening to you.
Hey,
hi. After that last question, I'd like to go back to the economy. My question to your panel is, do you think that a wealth tax will lead to a reduction in start-up funding for small and medium-sized British businesses?
Why do you think it would?
Well, I go to a lot of financial events around West Yorkshire, and when I speak to people there, especially sort of women-owned firms, there is a lack of access to like venture capital, start-up capital, even if they've got good business and investment plans. So I think an asset tax could take away some of our more entrepreneurial and investors, which just wouldn't be good, especially for deprived areas like the north of Britain.
Well, I should just say that if you're a small business owner or employee, this time tomorrow I'll be joined by the small business guru Emma Jones, who'll be taking your calls. It's been a very significant week for small businesses, with the increases to national insurance contributions and the living wage having taken effect. So if you have any questions or want some advice, give Emma a call tomorrow from 8 p.m. here on LBC. Let's go to Iain first.
I'm not a fan of wealth taxes. I don't think they're a good way forward. Nor do I think the national insurance rise was a good idea. I think that what we should really be doing is making a country which is far more geared towards growth by stripping back regulation, which is always talked about and never actually delivered. In terms of cutting red tape, we've had pretty much every government says they're going to do it and every government fails to do it. I think we need to make a far more entrepreneurial society here. We do need to broaden access to capital in the way that it isn't at the moment. But I don't think a wealth tax is the best solution. Personally, I do like the non-dom crackdown, which is getting some publicity at the moment. I think that's been quite good. I'd like to see much more of a crackdown on tax evasion and tax avoidance. Britain is responsible for washing so much of the world's dirty money. And if we really want to help the world, and we talk a lot about development and cutting aid and everything, if we really want to help the world, let's clamp down on on all the corruption, basically, which washes through Britain, through our estate agents and lawyers and banks and tax havens. And actually, we could make a real positive difference to the world. So I'd much prefer to see a genuine focus rather than just hot air and talk on this, but not a wealth tax.
Why do you think more millionaires are leaving Britain than any other country in the world?
Well, if you analyse that particular data, it was put forward, it's very flaky data, which was done by a company with a very, very vested interest in saying that this is happening. And if you look at some of their previous stuff, it's not 100% reliable. Therefore, I'm a little bit sceptical about the figures. And it may be that some people are leaving. The example I saw in the Times, which was fabulous, was of a woman who'd come here 3 years ago to get a lower tax rate and was now going to Italy despite her gluten intolerance and being concerned about having to live on pasta and pizza. Ultimately, I think I'm in favour of people paying equitable tax, and I think that should be our guiding light in how we approach these things, whether you're rich or everyone should pay their fair share.
Bobby Dean.
Yeah, I'm never quite sure what people mean by a wealth tax. There's lots of different proposals out there.
Well, say, for example, taxing people who have assets worth more than 10 million.
Yeah, so that's an example. But there are a series of wealth taxes more generally, like capital gains tax and taxes on carried interest and share buybacks. And I think that we could do with closing some loopholes in those areas to make the tax system more fair and just and equitable, as you described, because there is a sense in this country that if you reach a certain level of wealth, that you're able to pay effectively lower rates of tax than others, not on income tax, but in these other forms of tax. So there could be some closing of loopholes around those areas. But the question was about startup funding for small and medium businesses as well. And I think Ian's right about financial regulation needs to be changed here. Our financial system is geared towards lending for property, but doesn't really lend to businesses as much. And as a result, we become very reliant on sort of American private equity firms to provide the capital we need to grow and scale our businesses. And that means lots of great British brands actually have been bought up by these firms, when actually our financial system, one of the greatest in the world, should be able to lend to British businesses to allow them to scale and grow more effectively.
And of course, private equity is very short term, is geared towards making huge profits, and is often a really destructive form of lending, which has caused terrible and shouldn't be allowed anywhere near things like the care sector, where it's causing, and the mental health sector, where it's causing absolute carnage and doing disastrously, and shouldn't be kicked out like in Holland.
Your point about British banks not being geared up to lend to businesses, you're absolutely bang on that. I've started 7 different businesses in my life. Not a single time have I ever had any financing from a bank. In fact, I just ignored banks in the end because I knew that they wouldn't support me. And I'm involved in a business at the moment, which, I mean, it's ideal for a bank to support, but oh no, we've had to go elsewhere. And if you don't know the people to go to, you can't get angel funding, which is what it's called. I mean, you're stuffed, and that's why, even though we do have a good record of start-up businesses in this country, it could be so much better. Sorry for that rant, Jessica.
No, not at all. I mean, I agree with Tyler, and I agree with what Iain said about the principle of being against, we might have some different reasons for that and so on, but being against a wealth tax. And I put that in the context of the turbulence of the international picture that we've been talking about, no doubt, on LBC has been talked about all day, and we've discussed for half of the programme tonight, as indeed we should. So if you put all of that together, for me at the moment, we need that investment. We need money to be flowing. We need startups to be supported. Tyler's identified examples where he is up in Yorkshire of there being reluctance to do that, and that's the problem. My understanding is, I think there was a member of the House of Lords that did a report on foreign direct investment not too long ago. And the point with that is there is so much.
Would that be someone related to you, possibly?
Do you know, it might. I think you're right there. I think you're right there. But the principles in a report such as that is that, you know, you've got the rule of law. People want to invest in this country, and people instinctively in this country, when they live and want to grow their business here and have further investment. And we've got the strengths we need to build on, the rule of law, English language, and all the other strengths that we have. And at the minute, there is just this reluctance for people to invest. So a wealth tax would...
I should have been referring to you as Lady Harrington on the programme, shouldn't I?
Well, I think we'll stick with Jessica.
I do apologise. Aman.
Thank you.
Look, I think Britain has always been affectionately known as a nation of shopkeepers. We're a country of entrepreneurs. Free enterprise runs through our blood. But having said that, yes, you know, UBS is saying that we're going to lose 17% of our millionaires by 2028. That's a serious Swiss bank. But more than that, forget the millionaires. The real entrepreneurs, we're seeing around 50,000 of them go from the UK net just to the UAE every year, attracted by their pro-enterprise policies. But I would go as far as saying, in terms of addressing the funding for startups, well, we're spending £8 million on housing illegal dinghy-wallahs. I think that's the money we should not be spending on people that are breaking into our country, taking it for a free ride, but instead spending it on people who want to graft hard, who want to work hard and lift themselves up into prosperity. There's lots of them.
OK, Izzy in Edgware for our fun question asks, now Britain is getting a massive new Universal Studios theme park in Bedford. Which unlikely location would you place your new dream theme park or holiday resort in? As if Bedford isn't an ideal location. I don't know what you're talking about, Izzy, there. Jessica?
Well, I think the unlikely location I would go for would be the moon, because I'm not a fan of theme parks as a whole, and it would then guarantee that I don't get stuck on a log flume there. Needless to say, just generally, it's a great project. Of course, I wish it was more in the East Midlands, near East Midlands Airport and Erewash, but there we are. That's my answer, Iain.
And there's going to be a new airport in the East Midlands as well, isn't it? No, it's not East Midlands, it's South Yorkshire. I'm getting myself mixed up here. Doncaster. Doncaster's not far away, is it?
Yeah,
it's all sort of north. Bobby?
I'm going to go for Ed Davies' back garden, because it would get good juice. You know, he loves the roller coaster. I was on a roller coaster with him during the general election. And you might think it's greedy because he does already got Chessington.
Yeah.
No, they're brilliant. Yeah. Look at us, we're still flying up the polls.
That two-horse thing the other day was embarrassing.
Embarrassing for you, but I think we've gone up in the polls since, so we're very happy.
That is true.
You lost the council.
It's going to be a long council.
Well, as an Everton fan, I feel like I've been on a roller coaster for a long time, but I'd put maybe a Dodgems and a roller coaster in Anfield and knock down what's there.
Oh.
Well, Iain, originally I thought one of my favourite places, Bognor Regis, but then I thought, you know what, let's kill two birds with one stone. The Chagos Island, British Indian Overseas Territory. We take it back with a theme park.
I can see a few downsides to that, but sadly we haven't got time to discuss them. Thank you all very much indeed. Thanks for coming on. And on Monday's panel, we will have the former head of BBC Television News, Roger Mosey. And there's usually a few other guests listed. Maybe they haven't been booked yet, I don't know. But we will have a fantastic panel on Monday. It'll be a beautiful panel, a big panel. Coming up in the next hour, Keir Starmer has confirmed that he will introduce legislation to allow 16-year-olds to vote in general elections. Now, this is a subject that we've talked about quite often on this programme over the last 15 years, but it seems as if it is going to happen. Now, I've changed my mind on this. I was vehemently opposed to it 15 years ago, but I've been won round. I wonder if you have. People will say, oh, it's typical Iain Dale, he's gone all lefty nowadays. 0345 6060 9 07773. But I actually think this could be a way of re-engaging a lot of people in politics. Remember that Scottish referendum debate with just young people? It was the best one of the whole campaign. So why not allow young people to vote?
On your radio, on Global Player, and
Play LBC.
leading Britain's conversation. This is LBC.
From Global's newsroom, Downing Street says the UK is continuing to coolly and calmly negotiate with Britain's interests after Donald Trump pushed tariffs on China up to 125%. The president says it's because they retaliated with import taxes of their own, though